with Sheila Zielinski. The Sheila Zielinski Show, the only show to give you the truth behind the headlines, prophecy, and the deeper things of God. Now, here is your host, end-time watchwoman, Sheila Zielinski.
Hello, listeners, and welcome back to the Sheila Zielinski Show. This is the first episode back in September. I was gone for the entire month of August, but now I am back on the air. It is September 8th, 2015, and it is so good to be back with you folks. We have an amazing week slated for you, the listener, and it's my pleasure today to welcome two guests who really need no introduction. Steve Quayle from stevequayle.com and Timothy Alberino from the Alberino Analysis join me today to talk about True Legends, Episode 1, Technology the Fallen, a full-length documentary which is now completed, which showcases the incredible journey of Timothy Alberino and the GenSix Productions film crew that went to the Altiplano of Peru and Bolivia on the shores of legendary Lake Titicaca in search of something. And they're going to talk about that. Steve, as you always say, in order to understand the fruit of evil, we need to understand the root of evil. Steve and Tim, welcome to the program. Steve, take it away.
Well, thank you, Sheila. What an opportunity to be on. Obviously, we're excited about True Legends. Our first episode is already up on my website, and also people are commenting from all over the world. I'll let Tim deal with that, but I want to lay the groundwork why this is important. When we're facing a nuclear escalation that can turn on a dime, when we're facing everything that we're dealing with in the geopolitical and economic arena, the reason this is important is because history is about to repeat itself, but in the words of Jesus, in a different and a more intense manner than has ever been seen in the earth. I want to take everybody to Jeremiah 4:22 through 28, and this will set the stage for what we're going to talk about. God speaking through the prophet Jeremiah, "For my people is foolish, they have not known me, they are sotish children, and they have none understanding, they are wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge." Now listen to this, this switches from Jeremiah seeing the world as God is revealing it to him. Now this is what we're going to talk about. "I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light." Those words, without form and void, only appear in one other place, and that's in the beginning first couple verses of Genesis. So we've got an anomaly here that most people have probably never put together, and we're going to put it together real quick for people, Sheila, for your show today, so they can get it. "I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. I beheld, and lo, there was no man." That means no Adam. "And all the birds of the heavens were fled. I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness. And all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord, and by his fierce anger. For thus hath the Lord said, the whole land shall be desolate. Yet will I not make a full end. For this shall the earth mourn, the heavens above be black, because I have spoken it. I have purposed it, and will not repent, neither will I turn back from it." Now, what we're talking about in dealing with the subject matter this morning that Tim and I are going to kind of lay out for the believers and also for interested parties that believe that, the Bible is not relevant. When you have without form and void, those words are tohu and bohu in the Hebrew. And when they're used once in the Jeremiah passage, which obviously is after Noah's flood, and once before the flood, you're dealing with an anomaly there that is easy to explain, but it has fantastic repercussions. When Tim and the film crew went to the Altiplano in Peru and Bolivia, and they saw the architecture of both pre-flood and post-flood, it's really important, Sheila, that people understand that we're dealing with legends, myths, oral traditions, and historical accounts of prior to the flood of Noah, of a gigantic world differing from the world after Noah. There were, by the way, giants in the earth both before the flood and after the flood. That's what Genesis 6 states. But what we found in our, if you will, the Rosetta Stone of pre-flood and post-flood culture was simply amazing. And Tim, I'll turn it over to you now and just share how they stand in contrast to each other and take it for as long as you want to take it.
Okay. Thanks for having us on, Sheila. We're putting together our documentary series, True Legends. We're putting together information for people. We're putting the pieces together to demonstrate to people that the Bible explains. It gives an explanation for what are seen as the mysteries of antiquity, and obviously also the mysteries of the prophetic future. And they relate to each other, as Steve said. In order to understand what's going on now and what's going to happen in the future, we absolutely have to understand what happened in the past, and the deep past, the archaic past, the world before the flood of Noah. There's a lot of people waking up right now, even in the mainstream populace, to the idea that history is not what we've been told, because there's a lot of programs coming out now. There's a lot of stuff floating around on the internet where it's obvious when you take a good look at some of these, especially some of these megalithic archaeological sites, that something is amiss. History could not have unfolded in the way that we're taught. At least much of history could not have unfolded in the way that we're taught in school as it pertains to ancient history, what's known as Neolithic or antiquated history. So we are dealing with a time in which the giants walk the earth, but not only giants, all kinds of hybrid entities, according to the Bible, according to some of the extra biblical texts like the book of Enoch and the book of Giants. And we're discovering, and we're documenting the evidence that that narrative is in fact true. And in Peru, as Steve mentioned, there's a lot of megalithic constructions. And for those who don't know what megalithic constructions are, just the word megalith means basically building stuff with oversized stones, massive stones. And we see a lot of that kind of construction happening in the dateless past. And so in Peru, there's a dichotomy between what we consider to be pre-flood constructions, in other words, constructions that were built before the flood of Noah, and post-flood constructions that were built after the flood of Noah. And what a lot of the ancients did, including the Inca, who were the primary native populace in Peru, at least before the conquistadors arrived, they, just like many other cultures across the planet, built on top of the pre-flood stuff that was in many cases built by giants. So many of these ancient native peoples came and found the constructions of the giants and of these other entities, and they built on top of them because they could not rival them. And also they were seen as holy places and places that were supposed to be spiritually charged. We see that in Machu Picchu, for example. It's not commonly known that Machu Picchu actually has, amidst a bunch of constructions that were built by the Inca, it also has foundations, megalithic foundations that the Inca did not build. And Machu Picchu is a great dichotomy between what the Inca built and the capabilities, the architectural capabilities of the Inca compared to the architectural capabilities of peoples that existed before the Inca, that the Inca revered and indeed worshipped. In fact, we found evidence in Peru, and it's in our documentary, Episode 1, Technology of the Fallen, which is available now for rent and DVD purchase. We found evidence that the natives worshipped the giants, and they believed, and we have this documented, this comes from historical documents, that the natives in Peru and Ecuador and Bolivia believed that before the flood, there were giants both before and after the flood. Yes, they believed in the flood. And when we say the flood, we're talking about the flood of Noah. They believed that the giants before the flood were much larger than the giants after the flood. This is biblical information that the natives understood before the conquest happened in Peru. In other words, before Catholicism came to the shores of South America. Which obviously validates the biblical narrative. And the natives believed not only that there were giants before and after the flood, and that the giants before the flood were much larger, but they worshiped them. And how did they worship them? They worshiped them in the form of their mummified or skeletal remains. In other words, they took the skeletal and mummified remains of giants, again, historically documented. They enshrined them and they worshiped them as gods. And in fact, they enshrined them, they dressed them in kumbi. And kumbi is the ceremonial cloth that was used by the Inca. In fact, it was the cloth that only the upper class and the priesthood could wear among the Inca. Everybody else had to dress in whatever the common clothing of the time was. But the elite could wear kumbi because the elite were seen as divine. The Inca kings were seen as divine, that they descended from a divine ancestor. And the giants were seen as their progenitors. In other words, the giants were their fathers. So they worshiped the giants as their divine progenitors. And we even found evidence that these giants, and when we say giants, we're talking about anywhere from 15 to 36 feet tall, documented in the documents, in the historic documents, which again are in our film. By the way, these documents, which we have in our film, these historic documents, come from the 15th and 16th centuries. They're the registers of both the conquistadors and the chroniclers that came with them and followed. And they deal with not only the traditions and the beliefs of the Inca in terms of giants and the pre-flood world, but they also deal, again, with the evidence. In other words, what the conquistadors themselves and the chroniclers themselves found and discovered in the land as it pertains to giants. And they found the bones of the giants. And we're not talking about mastodon bones. We're not talking about the bones of giant sloths. We're talking about skulls, human-like skulls that were so large that the conquistadors would stick their swords into the eye socket of the skull. And these were rapier swords, so anywhere between 35 and 42-inch long blades, would stick them through the eye socket of the skull, and the tip of the blade would barely pass through the skull and touch the backside of the interior of the cranium. So we're dealing with massive, massive giants and absolute proof of their existence.
Well, I think it's what's really striking is the fact that when Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun, for that which has been will be, and that which is has already been, I don't think people understand or take it in the context of the words of Jesus. I want to go to Mark 13:19 through 22, because this is relevant. For in those days shall be affliction, such as was not from the beginning of the creation which God created unto this time, neither shall be. And except the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he hath chosen, he has shortened the days. And if any man shall say to you, Lo, here is Christ, he is there, believe him not. For false Christs and false prophets shall rise and show signs and wonders to seduce, if it were possible, even the elect. Now, why is this critical that I would read that? Well, we know that the Pope is headed for the United States with some new revelation that I believe is right out of the book of Revelation. I believe that you're going to see the beginning of the false prophet absolutely making his annunciations. But concurrent with that, while Tim was both in Peru, Bolivia, and on their previous expedition to Sardinia, which will be incorporated in one of the next episodes, and let me just say this, Sheila, we fund these episodes by basically people downloading the Vimeo stream or buying the DVDs. And if we had the money that, and what I'm saying is that it seems like God is allowing people to get involved, and a specific husband and wife made this possible for us. And it was interesting because, you know, Tim and I were obviously doing the Alberino analysis together and doing stuff together. And the thing is that when we talked about the expeditions, we needed a miracle. And lo and behold, God raised up a couple that gave us the money in order to fund the expedition. We didn't ask for it. We didn't go out and, beg for it. We did put up a thing on our website after that just saying, look, these things have cost this much money. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because we appreciate the people that download these True Legend series, or go on the Alberino analysis, or buy my books. But here's the thing. We're doing this for a bigger position than our critics can even begin to imagine. The Septuagint talks about the giants coming again, the great army of God. And what is all transhumanism? And you and I have done shows together. Sheila, what is everything? It's building a bigger man. It's building a new man. It's building what Nietzsche called as Übermensch. It's what DARPA calls their super soldiers. And it is amazing that the special forces communities around the world, not just the United States, but the Russians, the Chinese, and everybody else, is always looking for ancient artifacts for technology and DNA. Don't you find that interesting? When people say, well, how can you prove that? It's simple. It's simple by the integration of the advanced technology we're now seeing. If you would have talked to somebody even in the 1950s about genetically reproducing humans, unless they were part of Operation Paperclip, the Nazis being brought to this country, and unless they had an intense knowledge of the supernatural world, most people couldn't even have conceived it. And so why this is critical is that we found something, I think, that we're going to be blowing people's minds worldwide with, and I'll just kind of briefly discuss it, and Tim can go into detail. Well, in the area of Tiwanaku, on the Altiplano, what was interesting, due to the works of David Flynn in his book, Temple at the Center of Time, David proposed before his untimely going home to be with Jesus, the fact that he believed that the geoglyphs, these are stone carvings straight into, sometimes from a vertical, not chiseled into the side of a mountain, chiseled down vertically into the ground, into the granite, and into the bedrock, but of patterns and of sequences. When Tim started to investigate that, the Incan priesthood was given a language called Quipu, or actually not the language called Quipu, but the Quipu was like strings, like a necklace of different length and different colored strings. And they could do advanced mathematics, and they could record such amazing events on those strings. By the way, it's a very interesting parallel to the strands of DNA. Now, when Tim was editing the first episode of True Legends, he started to overlay the Quipu, Q-U-I-P-U-S, over some of the known patterns, the aerial Google Earth patterns for the geoglyphs. And what's interesting is the Incans claimed that they got their writing from the gods, obviously the people that we're talking about before the flood. The Incans believed that only their priest class could basically have this knowledge. And it's fascinating, too, when you deal with the Incans, the Aztecs, and the Mayans. One of the things they don't want to deal with is not only human sacrifice, but cannibalism. Not only did the fallen angels slash their offspring, the Rephaim, the giants, pass on their knowledge of stars and science, they also passed on their literal hunger for human flesh. Most people are now just astounded that Easter Island, the Moai, M-O-I statues on Easter Island, which is obviously off the coast of South America, have basically been found to be huge, and in many cases 36 feet tall. I've maintained, I know that people have always said, it's just the heads, that those statues were life-size representation. And so the point that I'm trying to make in all this is that the True Legends, our first episode of the series, is absolutely astonishing in the ramifications. Now I'll go one step further, and Tim, I'll turn it right over to you. Imagine that what we're going to show people and have shown people in the geoglyphs, imagine that they're the equivalent, of a printed circuit board. Imagine that printed circuit board is 3D. And imagine that the energy source that powers, and I'm not talking ancient aliens now, I'm talking fallen angel technology. There's a difference. That the power source on that printed circuit board, which the geoglyphs represent, which the Quipu, Q-U-I-P-U-S, recorded, is the entire history of the world before the flood and up until the time the flood destroyed the first insertion of fallen angels. In other words, the language of the fallen ones, the language of the damned. Go ahead, Tim.
The geoglyphs that David discovered, by the way, he discovered these geoglyphs viewing them from satellite imagery right when that technology became available for public consumption in high resolution. So as soon as the high-res imagery came online, for some reason, and now Steve and I understand why, David was drawn to look over the Tiwanaku area. And if anybody knows anything about David Flynn, has read any of his books, that guy was a genius, especially when it came to mathematics and geography. He did all kind of measurements from the Temple of Jerusalem to different places on the earth, different locations, and showed how they connect. I mean, so the guy knew what he was looking at, and when he discovered these things, he wrote an article about them, and that was one of the reasons why we went to Peru, was to follow up on that work by David Flynn. But he referred to these things, the geoglyphs that Steve's talking about, as prehistoric geoglyphs, which he believed and insinuated were built by either giants or fallen angels, just as we believe. I find it very, very difficult to describe these things. I tried describing them the other day on the radio, and I realized that my description was very inadequate because it's very, very difficult to describe them. You've got to look at them, and they're in our documentary for those who are interested. We break it down. We show a ton of imagery of it in high res, and we put some contrast on it so you can really see them pop out. I always tell people about this. If you're not astounded when you look at these geoglyphs, and there's not much out there that's going to convince you of anything or amaze you, because these things are absolutely amazing. And the geoglyphs are strange configurations of interlocking rectangular and circular cells that are comprised of raised mounds and lines that form a continuous circuit-like grid. And when you look down on these things, as Steve was explaining, it looks like you have a circuit of some kind imprinted on the surface of the earth, like a computer circuit board. Some of the lines are actually carved into the various stratums of the earth at different depths, and that creates a multicolored array of lines and shapes. And these things extend for over 100 miles from the shores of Lake Titicaca south into the Bolivian desert. And are obviously only viewable from high up in the air, and which indicates that they. And by the way, there are a lot of terraces in the area. Some pre-flood race terraced almost all of the mountains in this area where you find these geoglyphs, but the issue here is, number one, we know for a fact, because we talked to some of the archaeologists and some of the other people in Peru, some professionals, university-level professionals, who confirmed to us without a shadow of a doubt that the terracing was not done by the Inca or any civilization around the time in what we consider to be modern history, from the 1100s up. It was done by a pre-flood civilization. That is for sure. That's something we confirm with the university professionals in Peru at the University of Puno. And so somebody was terracing. It wasn't the Incas, but it was somebody else was terracing. But there is a stark difference between the terracing, which you can also see from the satellite imagery. You can see the terracing. There's a stark difference between terracing, which would have been done for farming purposes, and the geoglyphs. Steve mentioned the vertical lines. You don't use vertical lines for terracing. And again, some of these lines are actually carved into the bedrock. And so we're dealing with what we believe is actually an ancient, archaic language imprinted in the ground, has nothing to do with farming, although there is terracing there. And I'm glad there's terracing there, and you can actually see it again from the satellite imagery, because you can see the difference. The terracing is just looks like little horizontal lines. But then these things, in fact, it gives you a sense of the size and scope of these things, because the geoglyphs are massive, absolutely massive, literally covering the entire sides of mountains. And people have to understand that the Altiplano is 12 to 13,000 feet above sea level, and the mountains that are there are even higher. And these geoglyphs are just everywhere, extending for miles and miles and miles. And Steve was talking about quipus, which was the system of written language that the Inca developed, which we believe was developed based on this other language, this other system of of writing and numerology, which is literally imprinted in the earth. And the Inca had their system of written language and mathematics was comprised of quipus, which is what Steve described as the knotted ropes that conveyed all kinds of information based on the size of the knots, based on how many knots, and based on the color of the rope they used. I mean, it was absolutely intricate. But their mathematical system, which went hand in hand with quipu, was called Yupana. And that's Yupana. Yupana utilized a checkerboard system. So imagine like a checkerboard with the squares, and inside of the squares were dots. They would put, the Inca would use stones, circular stones, and this was their system of mathematics. So how many stones you placed in each square relative to the other squares would give you, actually they were actually mathematic equations, and also they were would give them different mathematical values depending on how many stones, pebbles were in each square. Well, if you take Yupana, the mathematical, so the system of calculating that the Incas developed, or we think borrowed, and you take quipu, which was their form of written language, they had no other form of written language, you combine them together. And I encourage people to go on Google Images and type in quipu, Quipu, and then also Yupana, and you'll see what I'm talking about. If you combine those two things together, and you then watch our documentary film, and you look at what is imprinted on the surface of the earth all throughout the Altiplano, I mean, it is undeniable that we're dealing with a similar system of communication that was incorporated into these geoglyphs, and that was then borrowed and incorporated into quipu and Yupana by the Inca. So the implications here are massive. I mean, and these are the implications that David Flynn was drawing out these implications when he was looking at these geoglyphs, that this is a system of communication that was either built by giants or constructed by fallen angels, and it absolutely blows my mind. It is mind-blowing, some of the geoglyphs that we show. In fact, I've never seen anybody really deal with the geoglyphs like we do in our documentary, and I know that some of the geoglyphs that we show in our documentary, nobody has ever seen. Because I looked at these things for 2 days and really scrutinized the surface of the earth there in Peru and Bolivia, and discovered some geoglyphs that I had never seen written about or published anywhere. And again, David Flynn was the first one to discover this stuff. So, and that was only a handful of years ago.
Well, Tim, essentially, I mean, you could say these geoglyphs are like a language really inscribed on the earth. Now, whether it's geoglyphs, megalithic mysteries, records of giants, or stargates, all this activity, there really seems, Steve and Tim, to be, though, a deliberate conspiracy to conceal the origins of this.
Well, absolutely. And Tim, I don't know if you saw this, Sheila, this just happened, but the Peruvians now are protesting the introduction of 3,200 new U.S. troops into their country. Did either one of you see that story?
I didn't see that.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Let me deal with the whole cover-up. And for the record, that Smithsonian article covering up the giants, that's a satire site. That's not a true site. Basically, what they try and do, the propaganda control ministers of lies have tried everything they can to try and dissuade people from even going down this train. It's time, Sheila, for the truth to come out. Because, again, the reason why this is covered up is, first and foremost, here's the thing Christians got to understand. The reason Christianity has become so emasculated, so impotent, so trodden under the foot of man, where we were the salt of the earth and the light of the world, now basically a flicker or maybe just a definition of salt, the history that the Illuminists, the Globalists, the Satanists, those who control the history, they do not want any reference points back to the God of the Old Testament, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. They don't want to even acknowledge he exists. That's why when the word I just read in Mark says many will come, claiming I am Christ. You and I have talked about this, Sheila, on your show, and I stand by this statement. Christ is not Jesus' name. And then there are the people that believe that, that Yeshua is his name. Look, if you're a Hebrew, that makes you feel good. But the scripture is very specific in how many times the name Jesus is used, and it's Jesus who is the Messiah. So many are going to claim that Christ this, Christ that, but isn't it fascinating that in the world of the occult, in the world of the damned, the darlings of the damned, there's one name they hate more. They don't care about the word Christ. They do care about the name Jesus. Now, why am I saying that? As it relates to your question to me, Sheila, and what we're talking about today, because I maintain, Tim, until I find out, and I'll do my best to find out by the grace of God in prayer first, and then believing that those who know, the point is that if they're sending 3,200 troops to Peru, something has either been found or they don't want what has been found released. Or, and I'll say this with no definition, when we start talking about this stuff, they'll do whatever they can to cover it up, to destroy the evidence, to do everything they can to keep the truth. But see, this is where Jesus is absolutely going to blow the lid on these guys. For he said there's nothing that's been hidden that won't be made known. There's nothing that's been concealed. So, Sheila, and I hope I'm being clear enough. If I'm not, help me to restate it. The reason why the giants, the reason why the post-flood civilization, the reason why, and by the way, Jeremiah's flood is totally different than Noah's flood. The earth has been destroyed 2 times by flood, not just by once. It won't be destroyed by a flood again, but by fire. That's the promise of the rainbow. But even as the rainbow has been taken to be an assault image against God, who created the boundaries of biblical marriage, the point being is that we're seeing now the very tip of the iceberg of what's going to break. What you just said, Sheila, let me make it even more specific. The language, once it's understood, and only God can give the revelations. Look, if Harvard can't do it, if MIT can't do it, what makes Tim and I think we can do it? Nothing, except only God can reveal it, okay? Or that someone's going to break ranks, and it's fair to assume that it's already been deciphered, and they're going by the playbook. So the fallen angels obviously knew that their day would come again on the earth to be released. Now, there are 200 fallen angels. Some of them are held in everlasting chains of darkness. But the point being, somebody asked me, well, how many angels fell? I said, look, I don't know the number, but I'll tell you, 1/3 of heaven fell, the fallen angels fell, so that's a whole lot of fallen angels. So I'm not worried about 200 compared to whatever, 10 million, 20 million, whatever. That's the perspective. And the fact is that by being on one of the highest plains in the world, the Altiplano, not only did the giants, not only is the history, both pre-flood and post-flood, filled with giants, and by the way, the giants diminish in size. It's almost fascinating because Og, king of Bashan, mentioned in the Old Testament after the flood, was 18 feet tall. Well, it's almost like there was a 50% factor because some of the conquistadors were absolutely talking about the size of these guys, and they saw their bones. Tim, share the appetite of the giant. Share the stature of the giant as chronicled by the different chroniclers.
Well, the giants that were discovered, the bones, had to be at least minimum 15 feet in some cases and up to 36 in others. And we know this because there's a famous case that some people are aware of who have done some research into giants in South America. There were giants that landed on the peninsula of Santa Elena near Puerto Viejo, which is now part of Ecuador, but then and during those times, during the times of the conquest and after the conquest, were part of the province of Peru. And those giants, and by the way, we prove that story is true in this documentary. The giants that landed, they came from over the sea riding on rafts made of reeds. They didn't bring any women with them. And when they landed at the peninsula of Santa Elena, the natives say, when they saw them, that they were so large that the natives only measured up to their knees. So obviously we're dealing with that's probably 17, 18 feet tall. and the giants then began to basically sack everything in sight. In other words, they were taking the natives' food, and not only the food, they were also taking their women, and they were attempting to have intercourse with their women, which was obviously resulting in the women's death. And the natives were infuriated, but they couldn't do anything about it because obviously 18-foot giants, I mean, you'd have to have thousands and thousands of natives to contend with those guys. So when we say giants, we're not dealing with what do you call it, Steve? Gigantism, the hormonal disorder, and
we're not. We're not dealing with any form of a genetic pituitary disorder. That's what all the scientists try and claim. But look, they use Andre the Giant of wrestling fame and others of some of these men like Robert Walden, one of the tallest men in our contemporary days, and some of the Russian and Chinese giants that are still, just 8 feet. And usually acromegaly is the medical term for it, but that's a debilitating thing where basically their bones begin to decay and they die usually at an early age. That's not what we're talking about. We're not just talking about tall either, Sheila. We're talking about massive and broad. The exploits recorded and the strength of these guys was literally otherworldly. And here's the other thing we got to deal with, Tim. A lot of people will try and come up with a argument against real giants based on gravity. Well, obviously the gravity changed. If you can have Tyrannosaurus rex, Brontosaurus, and you can have all of the dinosaurs and this massive Brontosaurs, then they couldn't, by the same mathematical formula, have existed. So something changed after the flood, and that's why the giants became smaller after the flood. But now, as mankind is messing with the fabric of creation, electrogravitics means you offset the pressure of gravity by using electrical forces. And Tim, the other thing that I want to get across is that, when people use that claim, they don't take into account the supernatural. The supernatural is that realm of the unseen world that basically, Sheila, now people are starting to record incidents all over the world, and many of them are Christians. So years and years ago, I remember making the statement, wait until the days come when your worst nightmares begin to take on form, begin to take on shape. And not to sound corny or cliche, they won't need to say we're back. Everyone will see they're back. So what's critical about this too, and Tim, what I think people are going to find out, if you look at a phonograph record, if you look at the DROPA, D-R-O-P-A discs, if you look at some of the aviary is supposedly a group of scientists, very well hidden, very well clued in, that claim they even have the, if you will, the hard drives or the equivalent of Jesus's crucifixion. And when the aliens come, they're going to claim they created Jesus. The aviary has been the keepers of the disc. Now, I'm not making that name up. You can go look it up. But the important point in all of what we're talking about today, these are the days of Noah. And Sheila, I know, if people don't even can understand that, all modern newspaper reports and the control of the scientific mafia over truth can be, signed up with an Oscar Mayer baloney song in the background. The point being is that we have got to shake and break out of, I would call, our electronic tomb of believing only what mainstream media tells. And here's the thing. Even in the climate study, the giants lived in a different environment. I've had multiple, people from the intelligence community and military tell me that the whole point in geoengineering is to create, and here it is, pre-Noah type weather that once inhabited. The giants, in other words, need another atmosphere. Guess what? They may have their atmosphere, but it's becoming more and more deadly to us. So, Tim, share with people how they can get this, because we've made it available in a couple different ways, will you?
Yes. This documentary, episode 1 of the True Legends documentary series, which is called, episode 1 is called Technology of the Fallen, is available both in DVD format and also for rent. And you can go to truelegendstheseries.com or stevequayle.com, and you'll find the links for both of those. It's for rent on Vimeo. And we have it's a 48-hour rental. It's a HD stream for 48 hours. And you can access that on Vimeo. Again, you can go to stevequayle.com or truelegendstheseries.com to get the link, or you can go straight to Vimeo and type in Technology of the Fallen. It's under the on-demand section on Vimeo. And what's really exciting about making it available for rent on Vimeo is that we've already got people from 31 different countries that have viewed this documentary. So obviously our desire, our goal is to wake people up to the reality of the pre-flood world, but also in context of the prophetic future and the biblical narrative. And so we're really excited that we've got people from 31 countries that have already viewed this. Again, truelegendstheseries.com. The links are there to buy both the DVD physical version and to rent the HD streaming version on Vimeo.
Well, and I think one has to remember this because people often say, well, what does giants and what does all this have to do with anything? And I think, Steve and Tim, people have to understand the importance of all this. We've arrived at the time spoken about by Jesus Christ as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be. The flood came, would you agree, Tim? Because this whole earth really had degenerated into a zoo, a morphology of terror, corruption, debauchery, and perversion. And that's really where we are at today, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Steve mentioned the desire of we'll just call them the Luciferian elite, to re-engineer the earth, both physically and in societal terms, to re-engineer the earth to make it as it was in the days of Noah. So for all those out there who discredit those of us who use that Bible verse to prove that what once was is coming full circle, in other words, just as Steve says, they're coming back, and the reality of the pre-flood world is about to become the reality again on this earth. I've got a book here that I've been reading called False Dawn, written by Lee Penn. It's a fantastic book that really outlines the religion of the Luciferian elite. And many people are familiar with Ellis Bailey. Ellis Bailey, of course, founded the Lucius Trust, which is a Luciferian organization, without a doubt, a Luciferian organization. And she was, of course, a famous occultist.
She wrote the 24 volumes of the occult, in fact.
Yep, and really was the one who popularized the whole New Age movement in the United States. She was an acolyte of H.P. Blavatsky, who was pretty much the mother of occultism here in the modern era in the United States. And Lee Penn says in his book here, I'm going to read this quote. Ellis Bailey believed that for the first time, mankind is intelligently participating and cooperating in the entire evolutionary process. Therefore, the spiritual hierarchy, and when Ellis Bailey and Blavatsky and all the occultists refer to the hierarchy, people know them as the ascended masters, but that's just a front. They know, and let me state this emphatically, the occultists, the Luciferian elite, they know that the hierarchy to which they refer is the fallen angels. They know that. And they state it, but we're not supposed to know that as lay people. But in the occult, they absolutely know that when they say hierarchy, they mean fallen angels. Therefore, the spiritual hierarchy can bring to an end the long silence which has persisted since Atlantean days and renew an ancient sharing of the secrets. Thus, in the immediate future, the masters, or fallen angels, will walk openly among men. This return to the situation which existed in Atlantean days when the members of the spiritual hierarchy were openly guiding and directing the affairs of humanity carries with it certain dangers. And then he says, Bailey's hierarchy wants mankind to return to a spiritual condition that existed just before the flood. And it's true. They want mankind to return to the spiritual condition, and they want the earth to return to the physical condition. And they're actually geoengineering the earth so that it will be like as in the days of Noah. And obviously, they're also engineering society and have been for a long time. So they're engineering on a physical level the earth, and they're engineering on a societal level to get us back to the days of Noah. And so that's why all these people who say, oh, the days of Noah, that doesn't mean what you guys think. It only means that when the Lord comes back, it's going to be sudden. Yes, it means that as well, obviously, but we know that the Bible is referring to things that are just deeper in many cases than what seems to be said on the surface. Obviously, anyone who's interested in Bible prophecy understands that. And so it's not just a speculation, it is a fact. And it's a really eye-opening fact when you study the occult as I have, and you realize that this is the plan. They want the return of course, the famous phrase, the return of the Nephilim. But that encapsulates so much more than what people understand. I mean, the days, that's why, by the way, what Steve and I are doing with True Legends, the documentary series, is so important and relevant. This is not a subject that people should be rolling their eyes about or saying, oh, we've been there, done that. We've already heard about Nephilim and all this. No, you don't understand yet. Believe me when I say, and I'm pleading with people, believe me when I say that you don't understand yet the dynamic of what it means when we tell you that they're re-engineering the earth before the flood. You don't understand. And the reason why people don't understand, both non-believers and believers in the scriptures, is because this subject is one of the most taboo subjects that you can talk about, whether you're dealing with archaeology, mainstream archaeology, whether you're dealing with mainstream history, or whether you're dealing with mainstream Christianity. Because in every Christian university across the land, they teach the sons of Seth theory. In other words, that in Genesis 6, the sons of God, the Benai Elohim, were not the angels. That only refers to human beings, to the sons of Seth. And we don't have time to go into that now, but it's just absolutely asinine, for lack of a better term. And it's not true. It does refer to fallen angels. It absolutely refers to the watchers from the book of Enoch. And this spiritual hierarchy that the New Age and the occult is in contact with, they're not these benevolent ascended masters. These entities absolutely despise the human race. They only want to enslave us and to destroy us, and they hate the gospel, obviously, and they are enemies of God. And there are no human potentates, there are no human dictators, no Hitler, no Stalin, no Mao can even come close to measuring up to the level of wickedness and pure evil that these guys, this hierarchy, these entities are about to bring to the earth. And people need to understand that.
Well, and it's interesting that the ancient scholars and rabbis who translated the Hebrew into the Greek Septuagint, as Steve alluded to earlier in the show, the Bible, we got to look at the fact that Jesus and his disciples read that version of the Bible. They understood Isaiah's predicting the return of the giants with monsters at the advent of the destruction of Babylon in the final age from the Septuagint. If you read, lift up a standard on the mountain, on the plain, exalt the voice to them, beckon with the hand, open the gates, ye ruler, I give command, and I bring them giants. Right there, the word is giants are coming to fulfill my wrath. What do people think that when he's talking about the day of wrath and anger, we're talking about desolation. It shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. Jesus knew exactly what Isaiah was talking about there, didn't he, Steve?
Well, absolutely, and obviously the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. You know what it boils down to, Sheila? God's people don't want to even engage those critical thinking processes that God gave them so they wouldn't be basically seduced by spirits, but by drowning out the voice of God through all the electronic media, iPods, iPads, computers, iPhone music. Look at everything now. Everything is designed to do one thing, and in my opinion, it's obvious. People may disagree with it, but it's to kill critical thinking. And by killing critical thinking, the stuff that we're talking about, this is not irrelevant. This is the most relevant thing you can talk about, because Paul said people are going to give heed to seducing spirits in the end times. So what we're trying to do, and it goes right back to my statement, I stand by it on talk radio for 25 plus years, is that you can deal with the fruit of evil and go just in a tailspin and on numerous tangents, or you can get to the root of evil. The root of evil will always define the fruit of evil. The root of evil is where the Christians will not deal. They can argue with the sons of Seth, but look, everything after its own likeness and kind. You didn't have any of the patriarchs intermarrying or producing giants. No, the human seed has always been defined by the parameters of the creator of the universe, the living God, who defined it. But because of the image and likeness, now this is it, this is critical, because the Illuminati hate the image and likeness of God, because they are haters of humanity, because they absolutely shake their fist in rage at the God of love, saying, we will not have this man Jesus rule over us, that's the second Psalm, they'll do everything within their demonic rage, their financial power, and all of their cohesive efforts from hell itself to destroy the image of man. Because as long as there's the last man standing, Sheila, as long as there's the last woman standing, there's still a testimony that God, in his brilliance, in his love, in his compassion, his mercy, and in his godhood, can do what he says he will do. So the challenge against him is to not only destroy the name of Jesus, which I believe the churches are the ones responsible for that. You know, I look at the history, I've studied the great revivals, and I've shared this on the radio on your show. Those of us who came out of the 60s, I came out of the Jesus movement 69 through 72, and those of us who were saved and filled with the Holy Ghost and had, I would say, transformative experiences with the power of God, well, there was something different. And what God's people need now more than anything is that type of an experience and an encounter. So getting back to I had a question from a gentleman. He said, so what do you guys hope to do? Well, it's simple. And we don't hope to do it. We've already been commanded to do it. You follow me? If this were human effort, believe me, there's a lot of stuff that Tim can do and I can do. But the point being is that we're following in the path that the Lord has laid before us. We're asking people that understand the relevance. And based on the 31 nations, I think the last time I checked on the amount of countries that have bought my book, Genesis 6, giants is the most amazing topic in the world because every legend deals with it. Japan is completely now taken over by giants in their anime Attack on Titan, so much so now that they're making a movie, a major movie. Isn't it amazing? If the Christians won't get it, if the Christians won't speak out, they're still arguing over 6,000 years creation, which, by the way, both Tim and I believe in a 6,000-year creation of God creating man in his image and likeness. But prior to that, that's what we're talking about Jeremiah chapter 4. There were civilizations. They were not human beings in the image and likeness of God. All the ancient civilizations, all the knowledge that those possess, this is what the Illuminati seeks to not only uncover and control, but to utilize for their coming deception. So, again, I would tell you this, based on, Tim, do you have a couple of the comments that you could read on the air? It's one thing to think that, here's what we want to do with the DVD, but here's what people are seeing and saying. What were some of the most striking ones? I think it's important, Tim, to read that because, people say, they're just blowing their own horn. No, that's not what we're doing.
Well, we're getting a ton of comments, almost all positive. And people are thanking us for putting this information out there. Actually, I even had one guy, after watching our documentary, commented that before he had watched our documentary, he was buying in wholesale to the ancient astronaut stuff. In other words, the ancient aliens programming. And he believed it until he watched our documentary. And we're getting a lot of that kind of stuff. So the people are being bombarded with the idea that in order to understand ancient history, you have to understand this idea of extraterrestrials coming from other planets, panspermia, they seeded life on Earth, and they controlled the history, the direction, the progress of mankind. And that's closer to the mark than, to be honest, that's closer to the mark than conventional history. However, it's not hitting the mark. It's not a bullseye. If you want a bullseye, you have to believe the scriptures, because it's telling you what happened, and all the evidence bears witness to it. And a lot of these people who have been frankly deceived with the ancient astronaut theory are watching our documentary, having read and watched a lot of the ancient astronaut stuff, are then coming to our documentary and thanking us for actually putting the documented proof in our film of what we're saying. In other words, there's so much wild speculation in the ancient astronaut theory crowd. They see some kind of an artifact, and then they make all these wild speculations without any proof based on its origin, who made it, how they make it. But we actually, when looking at the same artifacts in many cases, such as up in Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, we actually show you the historic evidence to back up what we're saying about it, not just from the Bible, but historic evidence from the conquistadors, the chroniclers, the Inca themselves. And we give you a better understanding based on historical fact and based on what's actually there, not just a bunch of fancy bells and whistles and a hyped up presentation without any concrete evidence. And people are really grateful for that kind of an approach and presentation.
Well, Steve and Tim, again, amazing job in the first episode of True Legends, the series. Incredible work. We are so looking forward to the other episodes. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen, and coming on the program today. Folks, True Legends, the series.com. Bookmark that. Steve and Tim, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sheila.
Folks, that was the amazing Timothy Alberino and Steve Quayle, stevequayle.com, and True Legends, the series.com. Do bookmark those sites. It is so fantastic to be back with you after a month of not being on the air. I want to encourage people, if you have not picked up a copy of Green Gospel, do so by visiting greengospel.ca. And for those who have purchased the book, I am asking, please go to amazon.com, type in Green Gospel. Also, the Amazon link is there at greengospel.ca. If you click on that, please do fill out a review. I really appreciate that. And don't forget, sign up for my YouTube channel. All my social media buttons are at weekendvigilante.com, and my podcast by going to weekendvigilante.com. You'll see the Podomatic pink button on the right-hand side. Click on that, and you can follow my podcast. You'll get all the latest updates and archive shows as soon as they become available. We have a fantastic week, folks. Tomorrow we have Coach Dave Daubemeyer weighs in on the Kim Davis situation. He just got back from a rally in Kentucky, and he's got some incredible information to share. It is going to be a fantastic program tomorrow, so do tune in. One small thing, if you go to the website, weekendvigilante.com, there is a ticker up in the top that tells you each guest of that day. And also, something exciting, I'm going to have an app, and it's going to be out this Friday. So all you iPhone, iPad users, there will be an app out this Friday. It's supposed to be available, and I will give you more details on that. And finally, I do want to thank everyone who really stepped up and sewed into this ministry over the month of August. This program is 100% listener funded. It's not funded by any sponsors. Oftentimes, sponsors come with certain political views, and I've decided for it to be uncensored. And so therefore, again, it is 100% listener financed. And we are excited to be back on the air this month, but we're also really counting it a privilege to carry the vision of the Lord forward. And we want to see this ministry continue to flourish in the future. We're excited about the days and months ahead, and we are in for a ride, folks. There is so much going on, and we want to be paying full attention to what is happening. And part of this program seeks to give you the deeper things of God, not just end time news and prophecy, keeping you up to date on what's going on in the news behind the headlines, but also the deeper things of God, because that's what's most important, is your relationship with God, and that you grow and learn and come into the fullness of who you are in Jesus Christ. And we want you to know we're full of gratitude for your gracious continued support. God bless you all. Thanks so much for tuning in. We look forward to being with you the rest of the week. Good night and God bless.